Hi everyone. So let's talk about HTML tables, and this is from chapter 8 of your textbook. So as you know, tables are the ways to organize information in a web page. So in today's discussion, we'll talk about how to create basic tables with rows and headers and cells. And one example of a table is similar to Excel sheets, right? And not only we will learn about how to create tables, we will also learn on to how to increase the accessibility of the tables. By accessibility means that, say, visually impaired person or like any other impaired person who cannot actually uh, see a web page still can browse it if he is using assistive technologies, some softwares or other stuff which reads the web page out to them, right? So if a page has a table, that person needs to know that there is a table, what are the headers of that table, what columns it has, what data it has. So you have to create the table in such a way so that the software can actually recognize every information from the table. It can distinguish between a header, a column, a row, etc., etc. And then we'll talk about how to style an HTML table with CSS. And finally, we'll describe the purpose of CSS structural pseudo classes. This is something new, but very interesting. We'll introduce you to that. That is CSS structural pseudo classes. Okay, so tables are used on web pages to organize table information. It is composed of rows and columns, similar to a spreadsheet. Each individual table cell is at the intersection of a specific row and column. Now, there are HTML elements to create tables. Before going to that, let me show you one table. So this is an example of a table. You see that, right? There are no like borders in this table. But how do we create this kind of table? Okay, so let me show you the example here. So this is the table you see here, right? It has 3 columns: name, birthday, and phone. So the way to create this table is inside the body. You see we have this table element. So table element is the container element that has everything in it. And then we have rows in it. So 1 row, 2 row, 3 row. That is TR, okay? So 1 row, 2 row, 3 row. And what is this T body? Well, this one is actually a grouping element which groups the body of the table. So these 3 rows are actually grouped together. These 3 rows are all part of the body of the table, right? Okay. So in the first row, you see we'll have like 3 cells, right? Name, birthday, and phone. So those cells are actually created using TD element. So this is the opening TD element and this is the closing TD element. By TD, it means data, right? The cells are actually, each cell is a data element. Similarly, in the second row, there are again 3 cells, right? And then in the third row, there are again 3 cells, okay? So first, the outer element is the table. Inside that, we have, for this example, we have 3 rows, 1, 2, 3 rows. They're grouped together with T body element, and each row has 3 cells using TD element, okay? So we learned about table row and table data element, which table data element contains a cell. Now, let's take a look about uh, what else we can add. So here you see the same table. Now it looks even better. This one also has a caption, right? So for that, what we have to do is inside the table, we can use this caption element. So this caption element will create a caption at the top, or if you put in the bottom, it will put a caption in the bottom. So this one has a caption and the body, right? Inside the body, you have like 3 rows, and each row has 2 cells. okay? And this one also has a border. We'll talk about that, how that border came. So this is the the same thing just I showed you. And okay, so this is how the border was created. So the border was created using uh, you can use the border using the two ways. There is an obsolete method which creates borders with border attribute. So basically, table had a attribute named border, and using that we could create borders for the table. But that's an obsolete method. The modern method is using CSS for any kind of designing. So for the table element, for the table data, that means cells, for the everything you create uh, a design rule. We'll come to that, and the property, CSS property is border. So we say the border is going to be 1 pixel wide. It's going to be solid, and it's going to be black. You see, RGB. It is going to be black. Okay. So let me show you how the border was created here. So here you see the style, the CSS style was used, right? So it was used for the table element, for the cell, for the header, everything. Uh, so we haven't used the header yet. I'm going to talk to you about that. So these design rule is now going to be applied on the table element, on the table cell element, right? So exactly. And then if I make it say, let's change it. Say this one, if I make it say 100, let's see what happens. Okay, so there is slight change in color. It's not very much visible. Yeah. So if this is hexadecimal value, so I change it to red, RGB. Okay. So let's change it to another thing, RGB. So let's change the second value. That is for the green, I make it F. Now it becomes green. Okay. Let's now move on to the next element. So in the previous tables, you saw something. So you see here that everything is actually a cell. Sorry. So everything's in the first row, we have two cells, right? In the second row, we have two cells. In the third row, we have two cells. Now, there is some difference. So these are actually values, right? So these are actually values. But the first two, these are actually not values. These are column header. So there should be a way to distinguish them. So here is the way to distinguish them. You use TH, that is this one. Now your browser knows, okay, these are also cells, but these are special cells. These are header cells. That means these are the header, or these are the name of the column. So that's exactly what we're doing. So the same table now we have, like the before, we have the same table here. The only difference here is we now in the first row, we have only header elements, name, birthday, phone, okay? In the second row, we have now the data. Okay, so we could do the same thing using the cell. We could use the TD, but just to differentiate, and this is also going to be helpful when we will introduce accessibility into the table, because any software that is reading the page, your web page to, for a impaired person, needs to know which one is a header and which one is actual cell, like value cell, right? Okay. So we got introduced to table header. And obviously table header is going to be, we expect them to be in just in the first row. Just in the first row. Okay. Next, so here, okay, using the TH cell. Now let's talk about some of the table attributes. As we said, like we could use the table border attribute to create borders, but now HTML attributes are no longer used. We instead use CSS to, sorry, we instead use CSS to configure tables, and already we have shown examples, right? But there are few attributes that are still being used. Two of them are like call span and row span, okay? The other attributes are not being used. I'm going to show you examples with the call span and row span, what the call span and row span means. Okay, so let's go here. Just to show you the example, we could just put, say, in the table, let's try to put border. You see, I could create border just using the border attribute instead of using any design, but that's an obsolete method, right? We don't use HTML attribute to create borders anymore. Instead, we use CSS to create border using the border property, right? Now we said like there are two things, two of the HTML attributes still being used, and they are like call span and row span. So here is one example for you. So we have two tables here. So one table and the second table. So this is our first table. Inside this, you see we have uh, uh, two rows, right? We have two rows, and they're grouped together using T-body element. Now inside the first row, we have a cell, and then we use this attribute call span equals to 2. What it means is defined here. This means this cell is going to span over two rows. Okay, so you see the first cell now spans over two rows. Do you see that? And in the second one, it still has like two cells. That means this cell says, I actually merge two cells in one. So that is how your call span attribute is. So the value of the call span attribute tells you that how many cells these row spans over, right? So, or how many columns these row spans over. You see that? Okay. Now let's go to the second example. So this is the second example. You see we have this table with two rows. That's fine. Now, and they are grouped in T-body. And in the first row, you see we have like two cells. So this is the first cell and this is the second cell. Just keep an eye with the change of the color. This is the first cell, this is the second cell. Now the first cell is special. It spans over two rows, right? So that's why we use row span. Row span equals to 2. That means this spans over two rows. And the second cell is fine. Now in the second row, now you see that the row is fine, but there can be only say one cell, right? One cell, because I cannot put two cell because already this cell takes over, right? Okay, so the row span means how many rows the cell spans over, and the column span means how many columns the cell spans over. Okay, clear? So I showed you examples from row span and column span, right? Okay. Now, let's talk about the accessibility. As we said, like, what is the problem? So if someone uh, is using some kind of assistive technology to understand a web page, then the software that he's using needs to understand the table thoroughly. That means it needs to know what this table is for, what columns it has, and for each cell it needs to know that what it is. So say let me show you the example again. Let's say if someone is using this and the software is reading this date to him, it should know that this value is associated with this, right? With this header. And then say it's reading Upland Sandpiper. the user needs to know that this is actually a name, right? This is actually a name, okay? So, or it's reading 1128. So 1128 can be anything, any date, but the user needs to know that 1128 here denotes a birthday for a person named Sparky, right? So there should be a connection between these values and the headers. So this is how do we do this? So this is the how we make tables accessible. So what we do is for the header elements, right? We use an attribute called ID, and then we put a value, right? So this header element now has a ID name. This header element also has an ID date, okay? Next, when we go to the actual cell values, we now use the headers attribute, and the value, we put the value. So once we do this, now our like the assistive technology or something, it knows that okay, this is a cell with headers value name. That means this is a value for these header, right? Because the ID is already established here. So for two things, using the ID attribute in the header elements, we create ID for the headers, and then we use those IDs using the headers attribute in the cells. So this is how you create the connection. So let me show you the example. Okay, so here is the table without any connection. We have headers, we have the cells, right? But now we are creating a connection. So for each header, we create an ID using the ID attribute. And then for each cell, we use those ID. Now you know that Bobolink is actually name, is actually name. This date is actually date. Okay. So this is the example for that. We keep on doing this for each row. We create the ID here, we use it here to create the connection between the cell value and its header. Okay, so let's talk about the CSS properties that we use to style a table. So we already showed you this property, right? Border. And then we use other CSS properties. So say align, background color, cell padding, cell spacing, width. So it shows you like what each thing does, right? So suppose this value align, it says that the table is going to be not in the left, rather it's going to take the 75% of the whole visual area. So let me show you if we have an example. Okay, so let's look at this table, Control Shift I, or just let's look at this table. You see this table is in the middle, right? So let's look at the design rule here. So in this style, you see for the table, we said like width is 200 pixel, right? So the width is just constrained to 200 pixel. Let's take a look at this table. So you see here, it says the width is 600 pixel, right? So even if we do this, it always remains as 600 pixel. Okay, so let's copy this rule and see how it changes this table. We have a table here. Let's add a style rule. Okay, we don't need to put two rules. We can just use semicolon. Let's see how it changes things. Okay, so you used width, margin, etc. Now you see that uh, the table was on the left. Now it takes 75% of the whole view area. If I make it bigger, you see it will take like 75%, right? And because it says like margin, now we have a space in the top and bottom. Okay, so this is how using different CSS rules we can design a table. So these are the CSS properties. Now a very important thing, CSS is structural pseudo class. This is a very important thing, like how using CSS structural pseudo classes, we can actually design a table. Let me first show you an example. So let's say we have this is a menu for a restaurant. So this is a table, and this table has a caption, and then we have the menu items, the coffees, the description, and their price. Okay. Now we want to make a table look better. This is what we want. We want the alternative rows to be of different colors. We can do it using the CSS, right? We know that we can do it using CSS. So what we do is, you see here, we have created a rule. So a class, using class rule, right? Class ID. We have created a class selector. We have created a class selector alt row, and the background color is changed to something. Okay. Okay. And then we apply these design rule to alternative classes, right? This and this. So this is a simple way to make sure that alternative classes have a different background color, right? So we created a class selector and then used class attribute to apply that design on the alternative rows. Now the problem here is these uh, table may have like 1,000 rows possible, right? In that case, we have to use this class attribute. We have to use this design 500 times. 500 times. Can you think? Like how many times we have to write this? Well, this is very cumbersome, right? So is there a way to fix this and make sure that every alternative row has a different color, has a specific color? Yes. So that is where CSS structural pseudo classes come handy. So the pseudo classes start with a colon, and then it has these pseudo class names: first of type, first child, last of type, last child, nth of type, where it takes a parameter. Okay, so the first of type means if there are like hundreds of the same element, the design will be applied only on the first of those elements. This one says the design rule will apply only on the first child of the element. Similarly, this will apply only on the last of, say we have hundreds of rows. So if I use these rule, it will be applied only on the last row. And last child, it applies only last child of an element. Okay, that means if we have a table, the rows are its child, right? Okay, so this will be applied only on the last child, that means last row. And this one applies to the nth element specified by the value. So you put, if you can put a number, so you say 3. So this one will apply only say on the third row, or you put even, so it will be applied on the second row, fourth row, sixth row, or you put odd, it will be applied on first row, third row, fifth row, etc., etc. Okay, so here is one example on how you can say, I want to apply uh, the same thing. I just want to do this thing. So I just want to apply these background color on only on the odd, only on the even rows, right? So this is second row, this is the fourth row. So how can we do that? So let's go here. So you see here, we create a rule. You see here, this is exactly what we do. We create a rule here, and this one is creating a rule for a row, and it says colon nth of type, and then we put even, and the background color is this, right? So once we create this, then we don't need to put the rule specifically in the even rows. Now what happens is this row gets the design rule, this row gets the design rule applies on this row, on the fourth row, etc., etc. Okay, so you see this is a powerful technique, and this is known as CSC pseudo class. And the second one, tr colon first of type. So this means this rule is going to be applied only on the first row. Even if we have thousands row, this is going to apply only on the first row. And the background color is something, say RGB. So it's 006 or bluish, right? And the text color is going to be something white. So you see that this bluish background and the text color, whitish text color, is being applied on the first row. Do you see that? Okay. Okay. So using this rule, now we are doing the zebra striping very seamlessly. So this is CSS pseudo classes, something very important to design tables. Okay, so learn these different pseudo classes, practice around them. And finally, table row group. So table may have like it may have like it already has header, it has body, it has say footer, right? So we can actually group them. This also helps in accessibility purpose. So let me show you this table, say this table, right? So this table, you see this table has it has like uh 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows, right? 7 rows. Now, the first row is actually a header row, right? So we group it, we put the first row in T head, and next 5 is actually the body. So we already have seen this, right? So we put it in T body group, and the last one is T foot. So we put it in T foot. Okay. So 7 rows, we put it in 3 groups. So this is, and if we use these groups, then it's also helpful doing designing. So let's say you see we have a design rule for the body, we have a design rule for the foot group, and we have a design rule for the head group, right? Okay. And not only that, this one, T body TD. So this one says like if the cell is inside the T body group, only then these design rules gets applied. So you see the other cells have say bold characters, but this ones have say not only uh, it doesn't have bold characters, and also these cells have like dotted lines. So you see that dashed lines. So that rule is actually being created here. So these are just for the cells, the data cells that are inside the T-body group. Okay. Okay, so there goes the grouping of different cells or grouping of the rows. So just the whatever we learned today, we introduced you to the HTML and CSS techniques, sorry, to create and configure tables on a web page. So that's it. So thanks everyone for watching, and I hope you now can create tables and apply different designs on them and use them effectively with make them accessible and use them effectively on your web page.